Peter Rollack, sometimes pronounced Rollack, was born in 1975 to Leonard and Brenda Rollack in the Soundview neighborhood, a predominantly Hispanic Clayson Point section of the South Bronx. He grew up in the Soundview houses, a housing project comprised of 13 seven-story buildings. Soundview Houses itself is one of 10 such housing projects located in the neighborhood. Brenda left Leonard when Peter was 3 years old and consequently raised him alone. On December 2, 1977, his father, Leonard P.T. Rollack, along with 10 other defendants, including Harlem heroin kingpin Nicky Barnes, was convicted of conspiracy to violate federal narcotics laws. Leonard, along with Barnes and Guy Fisher, was specifically charged with possession and distribution of 107.6 grams of heroin during the 10-day trial, but the jury failed to reach a verdict with respect to Fisher, and Barnes was acquitted of that particular charge. Leonard's charge stemmed from his sale of 1/8 of a kilogram of heroin to Drug Enforcement Agency informant Robert Geronimo and undercover agent Louis Diaz for $8,300 on November 29, 1976. Rollack Snr, in fact, told both Fisher and Geronimo that he suspected that the money was marked during the transaction. On October 27, 1987, Rollack Snr was indicted for the murder of Norman Bannister, as well as for conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts of possession of heroin with intent to distribute in 2 separate locations in the Bronx. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison, but his conviction was reversed on appeal. Rollack rejected another plea deal, this one for 20 years, and following a retrial in 1992, he was again convicted and again received a 50-year sentence. After being educated in the Catholic school system for most of his childhood, Peter Rollack Jr., Pistol Pete, attended Soundview's Adlai Stevenson High School in his teens. At age 17, the younger Rollack left home and moved in with his father's friend George Wallace, who he referred to as his uncle. In 1993, Rollack re-established the street gang Sex, Money and Murder, which was formed in 1987 in Soundview. His schoolmate David Mullins, who lived in the Castle Hill houses, joined the gang as well. The majority of SMM's revenue was generated from distributing cocaine and crack cocaine. Yarrow Pack, a Bronx native who sold crack and cocaine in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, recruited Pistol Pete, who, acting as a lookout and enforcer, began to escort Pack on expeditions to ferry cocaine and crack between New York and Pittsburgh. The two routinely transported approximately 9 kilograms per trip, for which Rollack was paid $3,000 to $5,000. On April 15, 1993, Rollack was convicted of criminal possession of a controlled substance and sentenced to 30 days in prison. On August 16, at the age of 18, Rollack shot Kenyon Jenkins to death. It would be his first killing. Sex, Money, and Murder filed incorporation papers in Delaware, forming the company SMMC Incorporated. The gang opened a business account at State Bank of Long Island. They used a payroll processing company, Paychecks Incorporated, to process checks and deduct taxes for payroll checks for members of the gang. Gang members obtained cars from Three Rivers Auto, a leasing company in Pittsburgh, through SMMC Inc., most, if not all, equipped with traps and stash boxes, hidden compartments used to conceal cash, drugs, and illegal weapons. On March 9, 1994, Rollack attempted to murder another man called Domingo Osario. At about 2:30 p.m. on April 8, Rollack killed 23-year-old Colton Hines, a fellow Bronx native and former high school basketball star turned drug dealer. Rollack shot Hines in the back of the head as he was washing his car at a hand car wash, located on Boston Road in the Bronx. He was found with $5,000 cash in his pocket. Hines' friend, Carlos Mestre, who was with him at the time of the shooting, though wounded, fled the scene. Rollack had previously murdered an associate of Hines who had attempted to extort a member of SMM, and killed Hines, who was an associate of the local Cortlandt Avenue Crew Street gang, in fear of reprisal when he spotted him as he was entering a shoe store. In June, Rollack murdered another man, Anthony Dunkley. On July 17, Rollack shot Mestre in the back of the head when he spotted him at a pay phone, near a Westchester Avenue store. Also in 1994, during a meeting with Rollack and Pack in the Bronx, David Gonzalez convinced Pack that expanding their drug business to North Carolina could be profitable, and the trio made 3 trips during which they transported narcotics to the state. On the second trip, the three transported 6 to 8 kilograms from New York to the Carolinas, and sold cocaine in Rockingham and Lumberton, North Carolina, as well as a town in South Carolina. During the trip, Gonzalez introduced Rollack and Pack to his associate David Evans in Charlotte, North Carolina. The four of them subsequently scouted locations in the city for use as crack houses to further expand their narcotics interests. Afterwards, Rollack, Pack and Gonzalez flew back to New York, leaving the leased burgundy Nissan minivan they used on these trips, parked at the airport, containing 2 kilograms of cocaine and $70,000 in cash. Within a few days, Pack caught another flight to Charlotte and drove the van back to New York. On August 18, SMM associate Sean Carr shot and killed Tony Morton near the Soundview houses. SMM members had initially perceived Morton to be a potential threat when he was seen driving past them slowly in his car, which had its windows tinted dark. The gang members then retrieved weapons that they'd hidden in nearby apartments and approached Morton's vehicle, which was parked close by. Both Morton and his passenger were dragged out of the car at gunpoint, at which point Carr rode up on his bicycle and shot Morton. For Rollack's third trip to North Carolina, he left New York with Pack, Gonzalez and Emilio "Lead Pipe" Romero, transporting 8 to 10 kilograms of cocaine and crack. They first traveled to Pittsburgh, where they distributed 6 kilograms of cocaine belonging to Rollack and Pack, valued at $20,000 to $22,000 each, and collected drug money. Next, they drove to Lumberton, North Carolina to collect more money. Afterwards, they traveled to South Carolina, where they distributed more cocaine and collected more money. On October 20, the foursome drove to Rockingham, North Carolina in order to meet Darius Covington, who owed $90,000 for cocaine he'd received on consignment. Upon being told that Covington didn't have the full amount, Rollack told Pack and Gonzalez that he planned to murder him. However, Gonzalez convinced Rollack to give Covington another day to pay the rest of the money. That night, the four traveled to Charlotte in order to attend a concert, with 2 remaining kilograms of cocaine. Following the concert, Romero was dropped off in Lumberton and the remaining 3 drove to Wilmington, North Carolina in order to distribute more drugs. The next day, Rollack, Pack and Gonzalez drove the van to meet Covington at a Rockingham fast food restaurant. Unbeknownst to Rollack, Gonzalez called Covington prior to the meeting and warned him of Rollack's plans to kill him. Unbeknownst to Rollack and his associates, Covington, who couldn't afford to settle the debt and failed to show up for the meet, had acted as a confidential informant for years and had alerted police the night before and revealed that the van would contain illegal contraband. Rollack, ignoring Gonzalez's attempts to persuade him to leave, suggested driving to Covington's home and murdering his wife and children. He told him, "Ain't nobody going to live in this world who owns me money." The 3 were confronted by law enforcement while still in the parking lot and asked if a search could be conducted on the van. Pack gave police the keys and signed a vehicle search consent form, which initially yielded no results. Following a conventional search and an exploration by 2 drug-sniffing canines that were brought to the scene, the officers impounded the vehicle. Though they were taken to a local police station, Rollack, Pack and Gonzalez were not arrested. The 3 presented fake IDs and were released. Rollack used the alias Nathaniel Tucker, Pack used Corey Hines, and Gonzalez gave the name David Richards. After deliberating between the 3 of them, Rollack eventually decided that the trio should wait for the van to be released, as opposed to immediately leaving North Carolina. Only after soliciting the aid of a Nissan mechanic, did police discover a stash box under the front seats that contained 2 kilograms of cocaine, $250,000 in cash and several firearms. After the contraband was discovered, Rollack, Pack and Gonzalez were arrested by the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Department. Both Pack and Gonzalez corroborated Covington's information to police and added that Rollack had planned to murder Covington's wife and children if he'd failed to satisfy his debt. They bonded out of jail several days later, and Rollack, who was bonded out by George Wallace, never returned to North Carolina after being released. After posting bail and returning to New York, Rollack was arrested for the killing of Hines at Grant's tomb in Harlem. Because he was carrying a gun at the time of the arrest, he was subsequently convicted of criminal possession of a weapon on August 9, 1995. Rollack received a sentence of 2 to 6 years in prison, which he served at New York's Rikers Island detention facility. He was given a mandatory 8-month jail sentence for weapons possession. During that time, he was approached by Omar Porti and Leonard Mackenzie, the founders of the UBN, United Blood Nation prison gang, who sought to recruit him into their ranks. The pair created the organization while housed at the George Mochen Detention Center, on Rikers Island, as an exclusively African-American gang, in an effort to defend against assaults by members of the largely Hispanic Latin Kings Street Gang and Nita Prison Gang. They modeled UBN on the Los Angeles-based Blood Street Gang, despite having no affiliation with the California organization. Rollack was approached by Porti and Mackenzie because his reputation as a violent criminal and an influential leader had preceded him. With Rollack's induction, SMM became one of the original 8 sets of the gang. After serving the 8 months for gun possession, Rollack was bailed out by his mother, Brenda, and proceeded to spread UBN culture throughout SMM and New York. During this time, federal agents in North Carolina matched Rollack's fingerprints from the gun charge to the minivan. He was only free for 2 weeks when he returned to court to face murder charges in connection with Hines' killing, where he was remanded because of the North Carolina narcotics charges. Gonzalez, who'd continued to distribute cocaine in North Carolina with Rollack associate McNeil, sent Rollack $20,000 towards attorney fees between 1995 and 1996. On November 5, 1996, Carr and another SMM member robbed Soundview Houses residents Valerie and Louis Flythe at gunpoint in their building. After Valerie Flythe picked him out of a police lineup, Carr pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in state prison. On January 14, 2004, Carr would be sentenced to life in prison after being found guilty of racketeering, engaging in a narcotics conspiracy, using and carrying a firearm during and in relation to a drug trafficking crime, and distributing and possessing with intent to distribute cocaine base. SMM members Brian Stone Boyd and Romero, who had both testified against other SMM members, testified against Carr at trial as part of their respective plea deals with the government. In 1996, Rollack was transferred to Charlotte to face drug charges. Authorities generally believed that Rollack was still directing the activities of SMM from his jail cell. SMM member Jose Rodriguez shot and killed David Mullins on November 27 on Thanksgiving Day, during the annual tag football game between tenants of the Bronx's Castle Hill Houses and Soundview Houses. Another man, 26-year-old Efren Soler, rumored to be a local drug trafficker, was killed as well after being shot in the head and body. 3 other men, David's twin brother Damon, Donald Goodwin Pino and Nelson Nahera, were injured during the shooting. 30 people had attended the event and the game had been underway for an hour, when gang members Rodriguez, Brian Boyd, Robinson Mac-11 Lazala and others approached the field between the 2 apartment buildings where the crowd was gathered and the gunfire erupted. David, who was shot in his right hip and hand, managed to make it across the street in a daze before dropping to the ground. The twins and Goodwin Pino, who was shot in both legs, were all taken to Jacobi Medical Center, located in the Morris Park section of the Bronx, where David succumbed to his wounds. Damon was admitted for a gunshot to the buttocks. Nahera was taken to the South Bronx's Lincoln Hospital and treated for a gunshot wound in his right hand. The following day, NYPD officers from the 43rd Precinct stopped every car to check IDs and probe for information related to the shooting. Lazala was the first to be caught. He was stopped by police in the lobby of the Soundview Houses on November 29 and arrested for 2 counts of murder in the first degree. Investigators reasoned that the gang members chose to attack their victims at the football game because they knew they'd be unarmed while they played. Prison officials refused to allow Rollack to receive a finished copy. Sex, money and murder has continued to flourish despite Rollack's incarceration. The gang has spread from the Bronx to New Jersey and even as far south as Georgia. On December 19, 2012, Henry Dankwa had verbally threatened SMM member Gregory Amunds, and at around 6:15 p.m. that evening, Dankwa visited a grocery store in Coney Island, Brooklyn near West 36th Street and Neptune Avenue. While shopping, SMM member Kevin Cheese Perry struck up a conversation with Dankwa and the two walked out together. According to court records, Amunds and fellow SMM member Michael Mikey Torres, who laid in wait across the street, walked up behind the pair and shot Dankwa 13 times, Amunds with a .9mm weapon and Torres with a .45 caliber handgun. All 3 gang members had been arrested by April of 2014 and each was charged with 1 count of second-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree criminal possession of a weapon. On February 17, 2016, Torres entered a guilty plea and was sentenced to 15 years to life on April 1. On June 16, a jury found Perry and Ammons guilty. They faced a potential 55 years to life prison term, and on July 20, they were each sentenced to 25 years to life. 6 SMM members were indicted in 2013 for the June 7, 2009, drive-by shooting death of 13-year-old Tamra Leonard. Sex Money Murder member Lamar Warren pleaded guilty to aggravated manslaughter and weapons possession on August 22, 2013. Leonard was shot when Warren and fellow gang member Bernard Baines opened fire into a crowd at a local block party that she'd attended. The gang members, both 18 years old at the time, were acting at the behest of the Trenton, New Jersey head of SMM, James, who then admitted to ordering the shooting into the crowd, in retaliation for the non-fatal shooting of an SMM member the previous day by a member of the rival gang's Killer Blood Street Gang. On October 22, Warren was sentenced to 39 years in prison as part of a plea deal. On November 8, 5 of the gang members were sentenced in accordance with their respective plea deals. Baines was sentenced to 21 years in prison for aggravated manslaughter. James was sentenced to 12 years for conspiracy to commit murder. 35-year-old Rashid Miller was sentenced to 8 years for conspiracy to commit assault. 25-year-old Robert Humphrey, who provided the firearms, was sentenced to 10 years for conspiracy to commit murder, and 31-year-old Michael Jennings, who hid the murder weapon following the shooting, was sentenced to 8 years for a weapons violation. Leonard Warren's brother, Keith, who drove the car, pleaded guilty to manslaughter in 2012. In June of 2014, 2 Atlanta SMM members were arrested on murder charges after acting on orders from Kenneth Eric Jackson, the leader of the city's faction of the gang. While incarcerated in a Georgia state prison, Jackson used a cell phone to instruct the pair to kill 9-month-old Kendarius Edwards Jr. in retaliation against the toddler's uncle, a fellow SMM member who'd murdered another gang member without authorization. 4 others were injured during the shooting to death of the toddler at his home in May. Kendarius' mother, one of 4 women who were shot during the attack, was found by police in the tub of the second-floor master bathroom with her son in her arms. She told officers that the assailants, allegedly including Christopher Florence, Marco Watson, and Devin Thomas, broke open the bathroom door and proceeded to shoot baby Kendarius in his chest, stomach and arm. Thomas eventually pleaded guilty to killing the infant. On August 18, 2016, Bronx SMM members Corey C.B. Brown, Josnal D.O. Rodriguez and Christopher Brabs Canada were charged with racketeering as well as the July 15, 2012 murder of Vincent Davis. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York accused Canada disposing of the murder weapon following Davis' shooting death. Since his incarceration, many rap figures have paid homage to Pistol Pete, including the rap duo Tariq and Peter Gunz, who dedicated a song called Sex, Money, Life or Death to Pistol Pete. Unfortunately, FBI and ATF confiscated the tapes of his music videos and used them as evidence. The feds then began to question the rap duo and probe their connection to Pistol Pete, which caused music executives to distance themselves from the rappers. Though he left the NYG Alliance for the UBN, both alliances pay homage to Pistol Pete by making a gun sign with their hands and throwing it up, so to salute the incarcerated gang leader. To this day, Pistol Pete has no qualms about his lifestyle and the consequences it entailed.